Hello, everyone. My name is Jaya Thomas, and I am the founder of Diverse Representation. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm really excited for today's fireside chat with Rashad Robinson, the president of Color of Change. And before we get started with the chat, I just want to take a quick minute to tell you a little bit about Diverse Representation for any of you not familiar with the organization. So we are a fairly new organization focused on increasing the exposure and the hiring of Black agents, attorneys, managers, and publicists in the sports and entertainment industry. So we are working to ensure that more athletes, more entertainers, more studios and networks are hiring Black publicists, attorneys, agents, and managers. If you go to our website, www.diverserepresentation.com, we provide the first ever comprehensive directory of Black agents, attorneys, managers, and publicists. And we also host various events like the one you are tuned in today. You can follow us on Twitter at DiverseRep, and you can follow us on Instagram at Diverse Representation. So I am super excited, as I mentioned, to have Rashad Robinson here with us today. How today's conversation is going to work is the first 40 minutes of the conversation, I'm going to ask him a handful of questions, and then we are going to open it up to you, the audience, to ask whatever questions that you want, as long as they are appropriate. And the whole conversation should take about an hour. So you should see a questions box on your screen. Feel free to type in questions during the conversation, and we will try our best to get to as many people as possible. Okay, well, welcome, Rashad. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you are super busy right now, so glad to have you. Yeah. So can you, before we kind of get into the conversation, can you tell us a little bit about Color of Change? For people not familiar with the organization, can you just kind of tell us a little bit about what Color of Change is?
Yeah. So Color of Change was founded 15 years ago in the aftermath of a flood, which was Hurricane Katrina, which was caused by bad decision makers and turned into a life-altering disaster by bad decision makers. Black people were literally on their roofs begging for the government to do something, and they were left to die. And, you know, I talk about Katrina 15 years ago because I think it's important to sort of help describe how we think about our theory of change, how we think about what we do, how we sort of recognize the role of digital media and technology as tools to kind of guide us. Black folks have always used the latest technologies to sort of guide our path forward, whether it was the telephone or the newspaper or whatever. And sort of 15 years ago, a lot of folks were using the internet. Move On and other organizations were sort of developing ways to help channel people's energy. And so, you know, there were a lot of things about Katrina that people sort of already knew. Geographic segregation, generational poverty, the impacts of what we've done to our planet and so many other systems. But at the heart of it, no one was nervous about disappointing Black people. Government, corporations, and media. And when institutions are not nervous about disappointing your community, it sort of doesn't matter what kind of research report you have that illustrates all the facts and figures. You need to build political power. And so Color of Change started with a single email to about 1,000 people, asking folks to join a new movement for social change, helping to channel that energy beyond any single spokesperson to like capture people's energy in that moment. In the moment of Katrina, people were giving to the Red Cross instead of fighting for social change. And so what we've been able to do over the last 15 years is really build a movement of action takers, of activists, of leaders in communities around the country that work to take strategic action on a wide range of issues, from criminal justice to economic justice to media representation to voting and voting rights and democracy. And we channel that energy in elections, but we recognize that voting alone will not solve all of our problems. And we do all of that work with this theory that people don't experience issues, they experience life. And that the forces that hold us back are deeply interrelated, that a racist criminal justice system requires a media culture that sustains it, that creates demand for it, right? That sends images into people's homes that says, we need more police, that economic inequality goes hand in hand with political inequality. All of those things work hand in hand. And so part of what we're trying to do at Color of Change is build that power to ensure that those who make decisions are nervous about disappointing our community, have to consider us in it. And if they don't, then we have the power to create the type of consequences. And that is important. Every community needs vehicles that can create consequences, that can force power, and that can bring more people in that effort. And that's who we are. Over the last 8 months, over 7 million people have taken action with Color of Change all around the country. And part of that is for us deeply gratifying that every day folks, both nationally in terms of big campaigns that you see, but in terms of local campaigns in the COVID moment, like rent strikes or campaigns to like get broadband expanding, folks are running those campaigns locally through Color of Change and winning efforts because we're able to leverage this idea of power to make social change.
I love it. Congratulations on everything you guys have been able to accomplish so far. So I know today's conversation initially was going to focus on COVID-19, but we are going to switch a little bit. We are going to talk about that. But before we get into COVID-19, let's kind of talk about just kind of everything going on right now. And we have a lot of Black artists, a lot of Black entertainment professionals who want to get involved right now with like criminal justice reform and civil rights reform, but they don't really know where to start. Do they donate? Do they sign petitions? Do they march? So what do you say to those people who want to get involved but don't know where to start?
So yeah, I always say, so in terms of like the broader movement, you know, always seek out organizations in your local community. A lot of you all are in LA. There is a district attorney race in LA that is deeply important to criminal justice in your own backyard. So as much as we may be thinking about what's happening at the national level, like there's a DA race and there's a current district attorney who has not been responsive to the community, who has been in office for a while, who has run up mass incarceration, who doesn't hold police accountable, has never prosecuted police. And so that's a piece of the puzzle, right? And so as I sort of talk about Color of Change, I want to make sure that we're constantly thinking about where we live. And I'll talk a little bit more about how Color of Change relates to local work. And then I always say at Color of Change, we need three things. We need doers, donors, and door openers. So we need folks who are doers that can, who are gonna like, yes, sign our petitions and share them with their networks, that might be willing to sort of engage their people in their space and point them to Color of Change, that folks that are sort of willing to show up to events for us and help to you know, keep members excited. We do, hopefully again, we do a lot of in-person events, a lot of things where we bring people together, do text-a-thons around political races we're in, that we bring volunteers together around work around, you know, dealing with bail reform and fighting for that. We bring people together around petition deliveries as we're facing down a target, and we need people engaged with us around that. I need doers, whether or not you're engaged with us or not, to think about the places that you work, the places that you have power. How do we play that inside-outside game? You know, I, before coming to Color of Change 9 years ago, was the head of programs at GLAAD. You know, one thing I recognized about my time there was how much the inside-outside game really worked. And you know, how much better Black folks can get at it. We don't necessarily have as much economic power as, you know, white gay folks. And so I don't want to make it a one-to-one match, but I want to just be honest that like, there are ways in which, you know, we as activists on the outside could always benefit from information on the inside, and that is part of the doing as well. Yes, I'm going to talk about the door opening and getting us in the room, but sometimes there's the stuff that helps us run a better, more strategic campaign. And when I come into your, you know, your office for a meeting with my staff, suited up, you know, I'll act like I don't know you, if that helps you. And all of those things are part of how movements have always had to work, how we need people on the inside and we need people on the outside. And I want to be very strategic about how we think about that. In terms of donors, like, so I hit the doers, the donors, that's really clear. Like, this takes resource, not just for us, but for local grassroots organizations, for organizations around the country. Like, this movement has to be powered by resources. Once again, I also see it in terms of, like, you know, we've been dealing with issues around Silicon Valley and hate. And I watched as some platforms were quick to start dealing with some of the anti-Semitic content before and as they should, right? And recognize that ADL was able to have an office in Silicon Valley and was able to engage in a way that we weren't. And so, you know, we're on the road to looking at that and building that, but thinking about all the ways that we support the infrastructure to be powerful, right? Sometimes we need to support grassroots groups, and we need to support the groups that can be big and powerful. We need both. We need groups that can, like, do the work to translate voters' energy in a local community, and we need the organizations that can face down Facebook. All of those things are important. And then the door opening. And this is, I think, some of the places where, once again, you all can be just incredible for us. Like, we need to reach more people. We need to build more power. We need to create the protection, right? If we're going to be an organization that faces down the NRA and faces down the Fraternal Order Police, you better believe that they're going to be coming after us, right? And attacking us. And so having more people that amplify our work, that stand with us in attacks, that help us, that recognize that no civil rights movements have made progress without people being taken on. You know, a couple of years ago when we led the campaign to get Bill O'Reilly removed from Fox, going after advertisers, doing some really interesting geo-targeting ads where we created a 1-800 number and started running ads into Fox saying, if you had been sexually harassed, call this number. We created monster.com ads for Fox employees to be able to report some stuff to a hotline. We got Bill O'Reilly off the air. And in getting Bill O'Reilly off the air, we also at the same time were running this campaign where we forced credit card companies to stop processing fees for white nationalist organizations, with this deep idea that you're not going to sponsor, you're not going to let Al Qaeda or ISIS, use your credit tools to be able to fund their work. Why are you doing that with white terrorists in this country? And I remember, this is all how it relates to power. We were going back and forth with these credit card companies, and they would say, you have to go to the banks, and the banks would say, you have to go to the credit card companies, and everyone had a different reason why they couldn't do anything. And my team was building the back-end platform, and we built this platform called No Blood Money. And while we were communicating with the credit card companies and processing companies, Charlottesville happened. And over the weekend, my staff went into the office and we got the stuff ready to go out. And that next Monday, we sent the final sort of like all the stuff to the folks. And that next day, we started getting emails from the companies with the white nationalist groups that they would no longer be processing fees for, no longer go to the banks. Suddenly they could like do the thing we've been asking, which is like how power works, right? And so, 30, 40 groups start getting cut off. I had white nationalist organizations calling, asking if they could sit down and have a conversation about why they weren't white nationalists, about why they were the other side of BLM. It was actually like, I was like, I gotta take this call just so that I like have this information if like I ever need to like write about it someplace. Like, and sitting there like having a quite surreal moment of like having people describe like the posters that they put up that are clearly inciting violence are not what they're saying. And white pride is the same as whatever. So I say all that just to quickly wrap up this like door opening and what it means to help organizations be powerful, letting us take over your social presence, giving us like, because when all that happened, we started getting, and you can imagine, we cut off white nationalist money. We cut off white nationalists like homeboy Bill O'Reilly after we'd already taken out Pat Buchanan off the air and Glenn Beck off the air, which were other campaigns that we run. We had all sorts of attacks. Like I had to move because they put my like home stuff, and I had like, I had this like great little walk up by, on the like right outside of the Upper West Side, kind of in between Harlem and Upper West Side. I had like a great walk up where you could kind of just walk into the building, and like folks showed up there after they put the address. So I had to like get one of these places where they have like cameras and a doorman, and where you're like, a little more stodgy. We had to move our offices and get places that had security, like, which was for a nonprofit, we had to change all that. We had to hire the security director that Southern Poverty Law Center had. And, we don't have Southern Poverty Law Centers like, hundreds upon hundreds of $1 million endowment. So I say all that to say that you all can help us be more powerful as we take on powerful forces in service of our people.
I love that. And Color of Change also has an office in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the work that the Hollywood office specifically does?
Yeah. So this is so important, right? We believe in changing the written rules, but we believe in changing the unwritten rules. And, like an op-ed is only going to reach so many people. A campaign is only going to reach so many people. The vehicles that people are sort of seeing and hearing from every day, the television shows, that content is so incredibly powerful. So we do a couple of things. First, we work to amplify and partner with like creative projects that we think will move the needle, and we help people take action. And so we had a great partnership with Array and Participant around When They See Us, and directed people back to our prosecutor accountability platform, because if you saw those episodes, you couldn't help but be outraged by sort of the prosecutor in that and feel like, what are we doing about prosecutors? Well, we've been doing something about prosecutors, and we could help people move from outrage to action. And so we do that, and we partnered with Scott Budnick and other folks around Just Mercy. And so all of these have been sort of partnerships where we help people take action around content that they're seeing. The second thing we do is we do consulting work inside of writers' rooms, where we bring real people and real stories into writers' rooms. Marilyn Mosby, who has a op-ed piece in the New York Times today on sort of the role of prosecutors, is the prosecutor from Baltimore who prosecuted the cops who killed Freddie Gray and took all sorts of racist attacks from the Fraternal Order Police and others. Marilyn Mosby, we brought her into the writer's room for 7 seconds, and brought other folks in to talk about sort of issues sort of around that. And so we do work inside of the writers' rooms. We also do work where we're doing accountability work. So we produce reports. So we did a report with UCLA on race in the writers' room that really looked at the lack of diversity with a goal of creating the energy and outside momentum to get more of our people inside of writers' rooms, to hold studios and networks accountable for how they tell our stories. Out of that 2017 report, we recently published a report called Normalizing Injustice. We released it in January and got a little bit of press. Now, all of a sudden, everybody wants to cover normalizing injustice. It's like the importance of building infrastructure. You never know when it's going to be fully needed. And like I've been doing a lot of press around normalizing injustice, because normalizing injustice, we worked with USC Norman Lear School to look at the 26 crime procedural shows on TV. We looked at the first run episodes, as well as sort of the what you would get out of a week of some of the most popular reruns. And what we found was, while these shows do a pretty good job of diversity in front of the camera, right? They create a world, many of them, where there are definitely Black and brown people, and that's good. But they also create a world with Black and brown people, oftentimes where racism doesn't exist, and have white writers' rooms. And so, Law and Order SVU, all white writers' room. Chicago PD, all white writers' rooms. When Dick Wolf is asked about those shows, and I hope I'm not offending anyone inside that works on any of these shows, I hope I'm giving you the tools to activate. I hope I'm like pointing you to some inside outside work we can do together. And because what I saw was that, with Dick Wolf at TCA said that his shows were apolitical, right? So imagine, right, we have been in the in a Black Lives Matter movement for about 7 years now, and that you could be producing these shows about district attorneys and police and cities and say that it's apolitical. And so these all white writers rooms, they shows also like do a trick on us with diversity, because we like diversity and inclusion. It's important, right? But we also have to be conscious about how systems and structures will realign. They'll give us something and then they will realign. And that's why power is so important. And so if you've ever watched these shows, you'll notice that they have more Black judges than ever existed in the real world. And I am not going to do anything to try to push back on jobs for those brothers and sisters. Nothing, right? And at the same time, they never give those folks backstories. They are just sort of like symbols for justice, right? So that all white writers' rooms can oftentimes send justice through the mouths of sort of stately, symbolic, Black sort of justice figures to make people think that justice is being served and there's nothing to see here. And so you can get the report and more about normalizing injustice, which is a very comprehensive report. Our sort of research capacity and team really worked hard with USC to really connect what we were learning on the ground to what sort of like USC knew about sort of images and content. And so you can get that report at changehollywood.org. So changehollywood.org is where we sort of, that report is. There's all sorts of graphics and stuff that really sort of goes in deeper on sort of what we found. And part of what we're hoping that report does, especially in this moment where like we released the report and like last week, I look on Twitter and Dick Wolf is trending. Because people are actually starting to connect back that type of content, right? That is fueling this idea that police are always to be trusted. Even when they step out of line, we give them the benefit of the doubt. Because you're like, oh, on these shows, you're like, oh, that's right, their father doesn't really love them. Oh, that's right, their partner died. We like, you know, and so I think it's really important that we recognize that police cannot be the only protagonist in the American story.
Definitely. And are you guys working on any other reports that, you know, we can look out for, or do you have annual reports that come out that folks should be aware of?
So we're working on some stuff around the news industry. We had a couple of things that were cooking pre-COVID, and like then COVID kind of disrupted everything because they were like focusing on like, you know, on the fact that like, you know, America's economic and political choices are killing Black people, and it's through a virus, but the virus, you know, has traveled the world, and it's hit our shores in a different way because of all the ways that America has built economic, political, and cultural, environmental systems that exploit, target, and harm us. And so, you know, part of what we've so part of the vision around the next phase of reporting is probably going to be looking at the kind of landscape now and thinking about what do we want to learn and what do we think we want to drive. One thing we have done, so I keep giving you guys a lot of websites. Some of this stuff can be found right on Color of Change, but we like to send people directly to where but if you go to colorofchange.org/narrative power, we produced, actually, this was like something that a lot of the reports are like, I like look at and make sure it's like, you know, not, it makes sense, but there's much smarter researchers on staff that are going to like do the numbers, and you don't want me doing your like qualitative and stats. Like that's not what they hired me for. But I have been writing and doing a lot on narrative and how we tell the stories, and how we tell stories in ways that motivate people, and how we tell stories where we direct our energy at the right things. And so we produced a report. I wrote a paper on messaging in COVID. And really what I wanted to do was do a couple of things. I was seeing a lot in the news where people were talking about Black people and Black communities as vulnerable. And, you know, vulnerability is a personal trait. You know, like I may feel vulnerable when I go on social media and see an ex that's far too happy with their life, right? I'm like feeling vulnerable. That's something I need to like work on myself. Maybe like see somebody, talk to somebody. Black communities are not vulnerable. We've been targeted. We've been attacked. We've been exploited. When you say Black people are vulnerable, you force then people to think about, how do I fix Black people? what do I do to make Black people better, rather than what do I do to change the systems that have exploited Black people. It's how we get to a lot of mentorship programs instead of actually changing systemic exclusion. And you all in Hollywood know all about the fact that people will create all sorts of mentorship programs instead of actually changing the rules that have prevented us in the room, as if like we can mentor ourselves out of systemic and structural racism. We will say things that like Black people are less likely to get loans from the bank, instead of saying banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. We will say Black folks are less likely to get hired in agencies, instead of agencies are less likely to hire Black people. When we put the energy on the systems instead of the people, then we build the right type of power. So really writing a report, sort of talking about that and helping people think through it. The final thing about the report that I think is really important is that as an organization that's constantly trying to leverage people to action, and a person and going on the news a lot, there's a way in which we can spend a lot of time talking about Black pain. We can talk about all the sort of systems that have harmed and hurt us. And I think it's important in all of these moments that we are uplifting Black joy, Black brilliance, Black creativity, all of the ways in which Black people have contributed to this society. But if we think about COVID in particular, Black people over-indexing as essential workers, you know, in essence, being the folks that are taking care of this country, making sure we have the food and the services that we need. Black people creating the most innovative, creative, and joyful spaces online, on IG and other spaces that are actually helping people get through this moment, right? Celebrating all of our contributions. Black people are not the problem. Black people are the solution. And in fact, we've always been the solution. Anytime we've had deep cultural and political change in this country that has moved us forward, Black people have been at the heart of it. Black people have built this country. And so I want to constantly find ways that we are not talking about us from a deficit perspective, but once again, to this idea of who is the protagonist in the American story. It is Black people. And if we can tell stories where Black people are the protagonists, then we are the people that folks will root for. It becomes very different in terms of getting allies and other folks to join us, right? I don't want people to join us from a place of charity. I want us to people to join us from a place of justice, right? Because if we get charitable solutions to structural problems, what we end up is getting people to say, oh, that's horrible what's happening in Flint. Let me send water bottles instead of cleaning up the pipes. Now send water bottles, but clean up the pipes. That's horrible about those failing inner city schools. You know, we should do a service day. Instead of, we should make cultural corporations pay their fair share of taxes so those schools aren't in austerity and they actually have the resources they need. Like, and they don't have to thank businesses for supporting them, but they actually have the things that they deserved in the first place, right? And so charity is sometimes fine in the moment, right? Sometimes we need charity, but only structural and rule change gets us out of a sort of paternal relationship with our country and a paternal relationship with communities that have exploited us.
I love that. So true. This is probably gonna be my last question because we have a ton of questions coming in from the audience that we want to make sure we get to. But you did briefly touch upon COVID-19 and the ways in which it has impacted Black folks, you know, at a much higher rate than other communities. And can you kind of just delve into that a little bit more? Specifically, the ways it's also affected the Black artists, Black creatives, Black entertainment community, and also if there are any resources that you could, would recommend for folks looking for resources right now who have been adversely affected by COVID.
So we have created this hub called the blackresponse.org. The blackresponse.org, I realize I'm giving you guys a lot of different, we can follow up with the different platforms but you can once again get to that from colorofchange.org. But the blackresponse.org is our COVID action hub. And it's a place where we have been doing a lot of work to fight for equitable sort of rollout of the small business loans. And we did both some polling, but I've spent a lot of time not actually on Capitol Hill, but on Zooms with members of the Congressional Black Caucus, with Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer and others, really pushing and helping to contextualize the ways in which how the money flowing from the Small Business Administration into the big banks didn't actually get to our communities, how businesses in our communities may not have the same type of relationship with banking, and how grants and other things need to be designed differently to kind of keep us whole. And so we've been very much in that fight. We've been fighting on a whole set of other things. And if you go to the blackresponse.org and you go to that like section that says resources, you'll see our sort of list of federal demands that we've been building power around through the kind of different HEROES Acts that have been coming out, CARES Acts at the federal level, to work we're doing at the state level, to a Black patients guide that we built with some folks in the medical field. All of these things have been like things that we've been trying to build, as well as building out a whole set of conversations to help make sure that we're not just looking at the sort of issue of COVID, but the larger structural issues that undergird it. And so, you know, there's an old saying that says like when America gets the cold, Black people get the flu. And so Black artists, Black creatives, just like Black folks in every industry, are being hit in a whole set of different ways because of all the ways that we have been excluded from wealth generation, generationally, the ways that we have been the systemic exclusion into certain industries, all the ways that once we're in structures have prevented sort of us to grow, right? I do think there's sometimes this story that if we just work hard, that we will get ahead. But there's a professor by the name of Derek Hamilton, economics professor, who's quite celebrated and a friend, and he's done some real studies on what it would take for Black people to sort of catch up on the wealth gap. And there's basically nothing we can do with that doesn't include deep and systemic changing of the rules. Like, yes, there'll be some of us that get ahead and we have more millionaires, Black millionaires and billionaires than ever, but actually income inequality has expanded at the same time. And so I want us to be clear about how we think about achievement, because part of this is like both recognizing that when we do achieve, we have to build that infrastructure to change the rules, because it's not that folks like are not necessarily working hard, it's that people or people are not trying to pull themselves up for the bootstraps, is that people don't even have boots. And sometimes people's feet have been cut off. And all of those things are very much part of how systems work. And so COVID was very much a place for us to sort of build a lot of energy. So on there, I think you'll see for us economic issues. You'll see a whole lot of work we're doing around mass incarceration. You know, we already needed to decarcerate in this country. The United States has 4% of the world's population and 25% of the world's incarcerated population. So we already had a mass incarceration problem. And then we have prisons and jails where social distancing is literally impossible. And so now you have these places where the virus is not just spreading through the prisons and jails, but it's spreading as folks are leaving the prison and jail who work there, or leaving jail because 70% of people in jail are there because they're too poor to afford their bail. And so we have a system, as Brian Stevenson will say, you're better off being guilty and rich than innocent and poor. So we do a lot around criminal justice, and then a lot on voting and democracy and fighting for vote by mail and all the efforts. Stacey Abrams really does a lot of great work talking about vote by mail. She says, you know, you've got like 15 people who are going to the polls, and we can get like 7 or 8 of them to sort of vote by mail. Here, I'm trying to do math on my head, but if you get like 7 or 8 of them going to the polls, if I'm doing vote by mail at home, you get a couple of them, you get like 3 or 4 of them to that can vote early through early voting that we win in some places. Then you've got, what is it, 3 left maybe? Don't judge me. It's also been a long day. I can see my. And so all I can say is that this, you know, you end up creating a much different type of experience with voting. And so, you know, we are making sure that fighting for vote by mail. Georgia, for instance, expanded by vote by mail, but they did it without including stamps on the envelope. And so, right, you want people to vote by mail so they don't go outside, and now you're forcing people to go outside to vote by mail, and you're making them buy a stamp, which in my opinion is essentially a poll tax. And so all of these things are part of some of the COVID age era work that we're working on, and you can get to it at the blackresponse.org. We also there are doing work to kind of support artists and creatives and others in trying to think about all the ways that as part of PPP, which is paycheck protection, which is part of the grants, that we are finding ways that we're supporting our creative community in those fights.
Awesome. And I know I said that was my last question, but I actually have one more. So I think I can speak for all Black people when I say a lot of us are tired, you know, at this particular moment in between COVID and, you know, everything that has transpired over the past 2 weeks. I think most of us are mentally and physically exhausted. And so I wanted to ask you, what are some coping mechanisms you would recommend for folks right now?
I'm the worst person to ask that question. I'm literally like the worst person to ask that question because I just go. I'll tell you like the story. I was like talking like it was like 11 o'clock last night, 12 o'clock. I was having a conversation with two very close like activist friends, Alicia Garza, who co-founded Black Lives Matter and is the co-creator of the Black Futures Lab and is actually on the board of Color of Change. If you haven't followed Alicia Garza, you should. And my other sister, Angela Rye, who's on CNN and always gives me something to smile about in debates with folks who I like will sometimes murmur about under my breath and decline debate. I try to figure out how to like take out their money and she takes them out on air. And so we were just like, I was just talking and then like we got off the phone and we were like, oh, they're like, okay, I've got to bed. I was like, oh yeah, I have to finish my column for The Guardian. And they're like, oh, you're editing it. And I was like, no, I have to start it. It's due tomorrow. And so I'm the worst person for that. Honestly, you know, my entire life has been committed to this work. And I believe we are at an inflection point, a point where we could go in huge ways forward or inflection points of those things where we could actually go backwards. And I feel a deep sense of like passion, a deep sense of commitment to doing everything I possibly can in this moment to make it a force multiplier for change and recognizing that, you know, at some point I'm going to get some sleep and someone who is younger and has a new sense of creativity, a new sense of connection to communities will like pick up the baton and take it forward. So the thing I will say about how we try to think about it at Color of Change is we do try to center Black joy in all of our work. Our whole electoral program is centered on this idea of Black joy. And Black joy is not the absence of pain, but it's the presence of aspiration. It's not just about what we are fighting against, but what are we fighting for. And for me, like Black joy is a thing that I think bringing people together in service of Black joy is so incredibly important because I do think that as we are looking at all these things that are happening, what I continue to hear from people who may not do what I do for a living is they are finding, I think, some level of solace or some level of purpose or some level of comfort in figuring out that they can do something, that they can like get engaged. And activism for maybe folks who like aren't paid activists, it gives folks the ability to feel like, okay, this is happening and I just don't have to receive it. I just don't have to watch it on TV. There is something I can do. And to see all of these folks on this call and to see folks on other calls I joined and to see all the floods of emails and to see corporate CEOs reaching out, and I know they're reaching out because the Black folks inside of the corporations have pushed them, have been demanding, have seen that this is the moment that all the ways in which they have had to be silenced or bite their tongue, that no more. Like all of those things, I think are giving people a new sense of purpose. And so for the folks inside of the companies that are reaching out and are making donations to Movement for Black Lives or BLM or Legal Defense Fund or Bail Fund, I see you and we appreciate you. And we know that like inside outside is key to us winning. And I believe in like the long game. Like I want to invite people into joining us at Color of Change because like, you know, we're working until justice is real. But I also know that we're not the only place to engage. We may not be where everyone's heart and energy is. Just join something. Just be part of something in this moment because our collective power is how we will actually change the rules that hold us back.
I completely agree. Okay, that was really, for real, my last question now. So now I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. We have a bunch of people who've already typed in their questions, but if you have any questions, please feel free to type it in. We have about 15 minutes to get through these questions. And I'm actually going to bring someone else up on the screen to get through these audience questions. Candace K. Stevenson. She is a member of Diverse Representation. She's a former entertainment lawyer, and now she is an entrepreneur. She's the owner of the Posh Rebel LLC, which houses the right and music clearance company Clearco Rights. So, Candace, if you could join us, please.
Hi.
Hey.
Awesome. And I'm going to step out and let Candace take it from here with a question.
Just before you go, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for everything you're doing to build diverse representation. Thank you for all the work you're doing to change who represents folks in Hollywood and to build more power for folks who've been excluded. Like what you're building here, taking that leap, being an entrepreneur, seeing an opening, like we need you. And so thank you for everything that you are doing. And thank you for having me in Color of Change on.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Rashad.
Thank you.
Thanks. Before we jump into the audience question, I have a question of my own. We touched on the TV and film industry and how what they're doing to diversify stories and align with social change. What would you like to see the music community do, and how can their representatives, lawyers, agents, managers, amplify their voices?
Yeah, this is a great question. So first, the first thing that we always do when we start out moving into new industry is we do these salons where we listen to folks in the industry too. And so I may have some ideas here, but I like to always listen to Black folks and allies in the industry to also uplift things that should happen, because I don't want to over authorize my expertise. Part of leading a justice organization is that you have to know where the problems are, and that means you got to listen. And so one of the things is that I want to be in places to listen. So one thing is, like, for folks in the music industry, invite us and have a salon with us and help raise some of the issues that we can be thinking about and maybe ways in which on the outside we can engage. So that's one thing. In terms of the actual industry structure, I think there's a couple of things. Inclusion riders have been sort of a thing that is moving, and we should need the music industry to do more in that space. Not all of the sort of labels have sort of real diversity expertise. They may have some diversity, but they don't have folks who are chief diversity officers, people who are actually looking at these issues through a lens of not just sort of individual moments, but sort of the aggregate of how the numbers line up, how they are doing year over year, in terms of where folks are putting their money, who you're hiring as consultants, who is being elevated and not elevated in that industry, who's being hired and promoted, the parity in salaries. All of those things are going to be sort of incredibly important. And then, I'm trying to find the right way to say this. And I guess the right way to say this is sometimes, I'm going to say this. I am getting a lot of calls from people who want to speak out and do things, who previously were being held back from doing things and saying things because it was too controversial. And so I guess, like, I want to just invite you all in to recognizing that who do we want to be in this world, and how far do we think we actually can push? And it's not just in the music industry, like it was professional sports. It's a lot of places where there's this tension of like not wanting to disrupt sponsorship, not wanting to disrupt all these other things. We have to move the ball down the road, and we have the potential to do it in this moment. And I think now more than ever is an opportunity. But there were definitely moments during Trayvon, during the uprising after Mike Brown, during Sandra Bland moments where we had gotten close to like getting things out the door and it had been stopped because of sort of like discomfort. And I want to just say that, like, let's figure out how to make that happen. And also, like, yeah, I guess those are the things off the top of my head, but also, like, I just want to do listening, and my team wants to do listening. And we have that office in Hollywood, and I have a chief marketing and storytelling officer, Rashad Shabazz, who really leads a lot of this work. And we want to be engaged in that way.
Here's another question from the audience. Thank you for answering that. Changing the system is great, but what about the people who run the systems? What about their hearts? If a change of heart doesn't happen, how will they get behind a change in the system?
Yeah, so I guess we don't act. So yeah, I agree. I actually agree. I don't think we actually get to change systems unless we either change people's hearts or we change the actual people. So sometimes you can't always change your heart. And like, you know, my 6 years at GLAAD of like hearts and mind shift was like, you know, we changed a lot of hearts and minds on LGBT issues. We also changed the rules, right? So even if we didn't change the hearts and minds, what you could say about a gay person back in 2005 when I started at GLAAD versus what you could say about a gay person in 2011 when I left versus what you can say now 9 years later has changed tremendously, even while people's hearts and minds were shifted. And some of that change created the cultural conditions for more things to happen in people's minds to change. It's sort of like a rock rolling down the hill in some ways, or a cycle or whatever. And so those things can happen. And so I don't want us to think of it as either or. I think they are actually part of the same ecosystem of how we get to change. And I don't think we get one fully without the other. I think having a lot of people that say whose hearts and minds have changed about racism, but they actually haven't changed the racist rules that hold us back, means that we have a lot of people that say that they care, but actually are not doing anything to care. We have a country that says that we have 70-something% of people that want gun reform, but we actually can't pass the gun rules that make us safer. Like, and so I guess we talk about it from a framework at Color of Change of not mistaking presence for power. Presence is visibility, awareness, retweets. It's a Black president, but we can think that a Black president means that we've ended racial inequality or we become post-racial. It is presence is having a lot of very famous Black pop celebrities or, you know, artists out in the world, and it can trick us into thinking that America loves Black people as much as America loves Black culture. And America can love Black culture and hate Black people at the same time. And so that is what I mean by like not mistaking presence for power, because we can get ourselves into a trick that we've sort of, people will sing our songs, use our hashtags, dance our dances, and then do all sorts of things to exploit us, to put us in harm's way, to target us. And so part of how I think about racial justice is that it's written rules and unwritten rules. So yes, culture and hearts and minds, but if we're not doing both collectively, we end up celebrating people that should not be celebrating. We give people a pass that don't deserve a pass.
That was a great response. Thank you. I completely agree. Another question from the audience. What action is Color of Change doing to support the Defund the Police movement? I guess I'll say, is that a movement that you support, and what are you guys doing to move it forward?
So yeah, we have nine key demands. And you could get to our key demands by texting the word demands with an S, demands with an S. My Long Island accent sometimes makes my S's off. 55156. So demands to 55156, 55156. You can text that. And we have a list of demands. And so in one of our demands, we talk about sort of disrupting the for-profit nature of policing. And so how I've been talking about the sort of movement around defunding the police, and a lot of people mean different things when they say it. And so I'm going to say how we have talked about it at Color of Change. Because I actually just had to talk about it earlier this morning on CNN. And I can't show up anywhere now without it getting asked about it. Is that I talk about it from a framework that we've been talking about this for years at Color of Change. And that means divesting from the things that hurt us and investing in the things that do hurt us. Over the last 20 years, as I said earlier, violent crime has gone down. And at the same time, our police departments have all grown. We've gotten militarized equipment. We have all sorts of things that have been given to police officers. And so we have communities that have a whole lot of police officers with tanks, but we don't have grocery stores. We don't have schools. We don't have mental health facilities. What we end up with is that we send people with guns to deal with folks who are homeless. We send people with guns to deal with kids who are being truant. We send people with guns to deal with folks who have mental health episodes. We solve everything with police And in the process, we have underfunded and created austerity for the things that we know keep communities safe. Now, if policing, if a lot of police was a sign of safety, then everybody would feel real. Then the hood would be the safest place in the world. And so what ends up happening is that we substitute police for investment, and it drives up mass incarceration. So what I really want to talk about is how do we think of budgets as moral documents? Moral documents in a way that they actually say what we value and what we care about. And when we look at Black communities and we think about what we care about through a budget, and we only fund police, and we don't fund our schools or teachers or counselors, and we don't ensure that there's like mental health and education, and then we don't ensure that there are the things that we know that white communities, rich communities, suburban communities have, then we are making a choice about how we want those folks to live. And so we are very much in this effort of dismantling police budgets. And part of that means that we have to fight the fraternal order of police. And so we are doing a lot of work around going after fraternal order police. I've been talking so much, so if I said this story, interrupt me already, because I've been talking all day on different stories. But during the Obama age, I remember going to the White House, and the head of the fraternal order police was there. And so we were all around a table. It was after Alton Sterling and Philando Castile and the Dallas police officers were all killed. And Obama brought about 30 of us to the White House for a meeting, and it was law enforcement officials, ministers, mayors, and some civil rights folks like myself. And they gave us assigned seating, so I had to sit next to some police officers and not next to some of my like civil rights folks. And we kind of go around the room, and a number of us talked about different issues, and police officers were talking about things, and I turned up my cue, and President Obama called on us. And to just be clear, like, as much as I may have been outside the White House sometimes pushing on the Obama administration, challenging, it was very nice to have a president that could use full sentences, knew about the issue, could run a meeting with 30 people, call on folks for 4 hours. We all had to leave our phones outside the door. But all that to say, I started talking about stop and frisk, broken windows policing, and racial profiling. And the head of the fraternal order police interrupted me, and he said, all of this talk of racial profiling is new to me. And so what I mean by going after fraternal order police, it is one thing for someone to say, we don't agree with your demands. We think that you're asking for too much. It's another thing for someone to gaslight you and say the problem doesn't actually exist. And so the fraternal order of police has called Tamir Rice menacing. And then after that, they went and got that police officer who killed him after he was fired a job someplace else. They're the ones who have called George Floyd basically an animal. They're the ones who have time in and time out again done slowdowns of responding to calls when mayors have tried to reform police. So we actually have to do work. Just like I can't win on guns without dealing with the NRA, we can't win on policing without dealing with fraternal order police. So this whole idea of defunding actually never becomes a reality if we don't actually deal with the barriers in our way, because we don't have an ideas gap. Some ideas might be really aspirational, like defunding and abolition. That might be aspirational. And some of the demands out there are do not meet this moment, right? But all of those ideas are nothing if we don't have the power to implement and enforce them. And we actually then have to deal with the barriers to implementation and enforcement.
I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to go with this one. It says, how can people outside of Hollywood help this cause?
So it does go back to doers, donors, and door openers. And so I want people to think about, if you're outside of Hollywood, what doors can you open? Like, where are you? Get connected locally. Join us at our platform, winningjustice.org. Winningjustice.org is the only searchable database of the 2,400 prosecutors in this country. Prosecutors are the most powerful actors in the criminal justice space. We are doing work every day to change prosecution, while we might be looking at what's happening in Kentucky, in Georgia, in Minnesota, and elsewhere. You too probably live in a place where you have a prosecutor that does not prosecute the police, that is not advancing justice in this country. And so we need more people in motion around holding DAs accountable. If you go to winningjustice.org, you'll see all sorts of information on the prosecutors. There's a video that we produced. It's an animated video that Common does the voice for, and it's great that it really walks through how prosecutors engage. We've also built out 6 key demands for prosecutors on how we can actually hold prosecutors accountable. So winningjustice.org is something that all of us can engage in regardless of where we are, because that is one of the places where we can engage. 70% of prosecutors run unopposed in this country, and right now about 91% of prosecutors are white. And so if they're the most powerful actors in the criminal justice space, then we have to do the work to change that.
Thank you so much for your time, Rashad. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for all of the insight that you gave us. If anyone wants to get involved, please join Color of Change, visit their initiatives and some of the resources that Rashad mentioned today. Thank you so much.
Thanks.